let's get started, Rebecca.
Golda Meir has risen through the ranks of her fledgling government to sit at the top at age 71, maintaining a tenuous peace on the world stage for her people. However, that peace is put to the test as a coalition of countries openly declare war on Meir and her cabinet. With time running out, and the coalition receiving advanced technology to aid them, Golda must choose. Will she sacrifice her people to win the war, or will she surrender to international pressure to keep the global peace?
Rebecca, let's talk about why we chose this movie.
Golda Meir is a very controversial figure, to be putting it lightly. So I was really curious to see how this movie would tackle her more human qualities. There's also a really interesting creative team involved with this. The director of this movie is one of only 2 Israeli filmmakers to win an Oscar.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that I did not know. And right, Golda came to power when I was just a kid. And so I remember probably about this much, but it's definitely within my lifetime. It predates you a bit. But you're right, it wasn't a biopic, and I thought it may have been a biopic. I didn't realize it was only just the small period, the 19-day period of the war, the Yom Kippur War.
The war is still very fresh for a lot of people my generation because, say, their grandparents fought in this war. Even their great-grandparents may remember the founding of the State of Israel.
Yes.
So it's kind of interesting to see how it takes events that people in that generation remember as iconic and kind of parse them down to almost a more personal level with Meir and her cabinet.
And obviously it wasn't a biopic, and it was such a small period. And I had shared that surprised me. Did that surprise you also, or were you expecting it to be more just a short time period?
I was expecting to focus definitely on the Yom Kippur War for a large portion of the movie based on the trailer we saw. Sure. The only thing I knew going into this movie was the casting. Mm-hmm. And I want to our cinema community to comment down below. Do you think this casting was appropriate for the characters being portrayed? But also, do you think that they were able to handle the material well?
Well, and one of the controversies is, right, Helen Mirren is not a Jewish woman, but plays a very Jewish woman.
This is the 3rd time.
Exactly. So I would be curious if like you said, as our cinema community, how do they feel about that? Do they have an opinion about that? Also, as you were talking about, do they remember the war? Do they have family? How did that impact them?
I'd also be curious to see if that impacts our cinema community's perception of the film once they go see it, too.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a great point. And I know we had talked about the screenplay and your expectations going in. I know we had talked a little bit about that off camera.
I was expecting a more tightly written screenplay. There were some points where I felt like the framing device of this story was only useful for one moment, and that's near the end. I feel like if they would have dove into it, I feel like it could have been a more impactful film. That was my main complaint with most of this movie, is it felt like it shied away from moments that really could have been impactful, and instead it just minimized them.
Well, I don't know if it minimized. The movie was 1 hour and 40 minutes, so relatively short compared to some of the movies that we've been seeing more that were well over 2 hours. I think 1 hour and 40 minutes was about the length that it needed to be. Maybe even a little bit shorter.
This movie felt long.
It felt long. And we were talking about that. It felt flat.
I think maybe the potential reason for that might have been that this is a PG-13 rated movie.
Oh, okay. So you're thinking if it would have been a R-rated, it would have dove in a little bit deeper into what aspects?
I think the biggest thing for the story behind this film is that this is an incredible loss of life for a new country.
Absolutely true.
There's some talk at the beginning of the film of the 6-Day War, which was considered a decisive victory.
Yes.
In one area by all parties involved. This is a little bit more nebulous. Most of the government of Israel basically had to pick up the pieces after this event happened. Mm-hmm. It was almost a turning point saying, yes, we are fallible. And I think that would have made more of an impact. If this had gotten an R rating, we could have seen more deeply. It's hinted at in several scenes, but I don't really feel the impact. Everybody feels nameless and shapeless in this moment. And when you have characters' key motivation being, we're losing lives, we can't do anything, you need to feel that as the audience.
Well, and I don't disagree with that. I felt, I mean, Golda is a very, she's since passed, of course, but she's a very big person. And it felt that they had not minimized her, but her bigness in the room, her power, her personality felt very much downplayed. And at one point we were talking about her iconic shoes, which is, a thing for her. But it felt like they would throw little things in there like, oh, okay, that's nice to know about her shoes. And I'm thinking, well, I wanted to know more about her. They gave a little bit like her being, raised in the UK, or excuse me, the Ukraine. That was helpful if you didn't know that. But it felt like there could be more. Obviously, her chain smoking was a piece. Her going through her cancer
treatment. There's a lot of smoking in this movie.
I know. And
it's very common in that time
period.
I
was going to say, you grew up in the 70s. That actually was a thing. Unfortunately, it was a thing. And I don't know. It felt like it just felt too simplistic for her. And as you said, when she was going in and they were asking her lots of questions to determine her culpability or her, right? And it was one of those things where they didn't really dig deep into it.
I feel like that format could have been used to kind of provide perspective on several moments.
Yes, agreed.
That could have been more powerful. Like if they would have shown her in that moment.
Yes.
And then cut back to it, and she would have kind of minimized it. It would have shown how she's changed as a person.
Well, and
then that last moment would have been more impactful. I don't want to spoil it because it's a good lead up, but I felt like it's a waste of storytelling space.
Well, and you and I talked about anytime you write a book, anytime you read a story, anytime you write a movie, you have to make creative decisions. You can't cover everything.
But there's also economics in storytelling.
Yes.
Everybody has to have a reason for existing. If you don't have a reason for existing, why are they there? It makes the audience lose focus. And that's one of the things that really annoyed me with this film.
That it just watered it down.
It watered it down. I was very impressed with the attention to detail. Everybody was named with the exception of Golda's aide. I had to do some auxiliary research to find out who that was.
Correct.
Which was kind of disappointing, but that's
and they did. They were very intentional. Names and titles were actually on the screen, so they wanted you to know.
It's very cohesive. I was really impressed at the cohesiveness of the integrity of the information being presented.
I agree with that. I think that's important because you hear names. I'm sure you've heard names over the years. I think it was helpful to have that.
It helped me definitely. I mean, it's one thing to open a history book and just go, this person, this person, this person.
Yes, agreed.
But it was nice to see them interacting with Golda. And I also like how it didn't sanctify Golda either. It pointed out her flaws.
Well, and to me, one of the standout pieces to me was her humanity. She was tough, she was strong, she was decisive. Her decisiveness was reflected in casualties, and her lack of decisiveness, casualties. Clearly, neither one of us have been in that situation, so we offer a lot of, respect for making decisions like that for your country. However, the toughness was a little watered down, but there were spots of humanity. You saw little tears. You saw her reaching out to different people and her connection with them. So there was a humanity piece to it, which I did appreciate.
This film is named Golda for a reason. It is focusing on her, but I feel
correct.
like it's also the minute you bring other people in, you are forced to recognize their perspective, and I feel like the filmmakers didn't do that as much. There's a key scene with a loss that becomes very personal to Golda, and all you see is Golda's face.
Yes.
And all you hear is another character reacting to this loss. And I think in the hands of another director, that could have been cheap and trite.
Yes.
And it's not the choice I would have made, but I feel like it respects Golda's point of view.
Well, and exactly it. It's not narrated, but through her eyes, you see everything that's happening.
There's a lot of use of reflections in this movie.
Well, and the cinematography actually helped communicate the message that sometimes the movie wasn't otherwise through the screenplay. Yeah, I think it was a good movie. However, like you said, it was flat. At times it was boring, truly.
Yeah, I think a lot of the auxiliary creative team, like Dasha Dauenhauer for the music and
That was good.
Jasper Wolf for the cinematography, did a lot of heavy lifting that this movie otherwise wasn't, I wouldn't say not equipped to handle, but just didn't want to reckon with.
Correct. It didn't go there. I know it sounds kind of cheesy, like, oh, they didn't go there, but they truly didn't go there. And the actors were good. The casting, I thought, was reasonable.
I wish they would have taken more risks with this movie.
That's a great way to say. I appreciate that. I think that's the word.
This movie is safe in a, other than the music, other than the cinematography, in almost a boring way to me.
Correct. And safe can be interesting, but in this case, it didn't feel that way to me either.
This movie just felt really dry to me. And I like dry movies, but if you're coming into this hoping that there's a little bit of meat, you're hoping that the characters are wrestling with these things instead of some moments feeling like a brush off.
Well, and there were a few lines like Henry Kissinger, when he said, his line when he was sitting with Golda at the table, that was powerful. You and I both kind of looked at each other and said, wow, that was good. But even him, I mean, his role was just a little flat too. And I don't think, again, it was the acting. I do think it was the script that had the biggest problem.
Sometimes the script didn't even know what to do with Golda. And it's like,
That's true.
if you don't know what to do with the main character of your movie, the audience isn't going to either. If your audience is running around in circles, that's just going to confuse your audience, annoy your audience, and alienate your audience. And that's one thing you don't want them to do in a very serious topic like this.
Well, and to be clear, I hear you saying it was boring, right? I'm saying the same thing.
And I find these events fascinating.
That's what I want to point out, that it was boring because it was a historical movie. It was boring because, it happened back then.
This is so far away from when I'm living now.
Correct. Right. It's not relatable. We love history movies. We love documentaries.
We are openly invested in the subject material of this movie specifically.
100%.
And I am bored.
and that's painful. That's painful because
I am slumped over in the chair just going,
yeah, no. And we've talked about kind of the slump, because the slump is a real thing. And if you're slumped over, and honestly, I was engaged. I was entertained, as crazy as that sounds for a war movie. I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. It's weird. It's hard to go, I enjoyed it, but I don't know if I liked it.
And I'm not asking for violence's sake, like, ooh, dead people. I'm asking for engagement with your material.
Correct. And that's what we were missing.
Yeah, I was talking with you on the ride over to the studio.
Sure.
And I said there were enough details to keep me engaged, but nothing to really entertain me, to keep my focus, to hold my focus. I'm just like, oh, they did that again. Oh, that's kind of an interesting motif that they're going through as filmmakers.
Well, the one thing I will say for the movie is I didn't feel lost, meaning I knew where they were in the war, not because they just put the date on there, right? I mean, clearly I could figure that one out.
It's very respectful, too.
Well, and they would show the map, and they said what they were doing, and you would hear the voices from the people on the front line. And so there were elements that I thought, that's really good.
Do more with it. Do more with it.
Exactly. And it just felt like every little scene was independent of the entire movie. I think that's the other part that was a disappointment to me, the cohesion.
I can see what you're saying. I felt like I was watching 16 little short films.
That's what it felt like.
It didn't feel like a full movie. There's maybe one or two scenes I could see, okay, this kind of stretches into a longer film. But it's dry.
It's dry. It's very dry.
Have some coffee for this one.
That's right. 1 to 5. What's your moth rating for this movie?
This is a very light 2. I am tempted to dip this down to a 1.5. But honestly, the cinematography and the music kept the movie as a movie for me. It kept it going. It felt more cohesive with those two elements, and those were really good. I was consistently keeping my ear out for some of the music choices.
Yes, agreed.
I was consistently watching for the cinematography. Other than that, this movie was dry.
I would agree with that. I would also give it a 2. And for me, 2 and a wing feels too high. I looked through it and I said, no, a 2. Because very much like you said, the cinematography, the music was phenomenal. The directing was good, though it fell flat.
There were definitely some choices made that I think a lot of filmmakers would be afraid to choose in a movie like this.
Correct. And I would appreciate those. And the casting was good.
It's just somehow something got lost. And I think it was just these filmmakers wanted to play it safe because this is such a, I guess you could say, explosive story.
Correct. I would agree with that. Thank you for watching this Cocoon Cast clip. This clip was taken from our weekly show, which is released on Saturdays.
If you enjoyed this video, click the link or head over to our main channel for more movie reviews, Hollywood news with a slice of snark. Thank you for watching, and remember,
Movies are
better together.